Hello, Lewis. Good to see you again.
Good
Um,
seeing you, Philip.
thank you. I'm doing some new research on certificates in entrepreneurship, university certificates in entrepreneurship. In particular, what are the motivations for universities and colleges to develop and offer a certificate in entrepreneurship? Um, and also for those primarily liberal arts institutions that may not have a business school or a school of engineering or any professional school whatsoever. I'm seeing that they are looking to develop certificates in entrepreneurship as a way of bringing in multidisciplinary um, areas, students from multidisciplinary areas, and students who are studying liberal arts disciplines um, for which entrepreneurship is not going to be about, launching and starting a technology venture-backed startup company, but more about how they can manage their personal assets for their career. So for the Chaffetz School, what I'm seeing is that you offer a post-baccalaureate certificate in entrepreneurship, but you don't have one for undergraduates. Is that correct?
That's correct. At Chaffetz and at St. Louis University, we only have the graduate degree at this point.
And are there any plans or any thinking about offering it to undergraduates?
Yeah, I mean, a little background. I've been here a little over a year, so still understanding the landscape. But that is one thing we are looking at. But going back into my past life in my previous university, the approach we took is similar in terms of looking for like a gap of offerings. So if you think about the concentrations that we offer, whether it be from engineering or from the business school, the minors that we offer from the business school and entrepreneurship, is there opportunity to fill a gap for students that might not be able to take the full boat of a major or a minor, and also maybe students that typically we might miss, and the certificate might be the right approach. We're also doing something a little different at St. Louis U in terms of micro credentialing and stacking credentials through digital badges is what we use, which is definitely a step below the certificate in terms of time and commitment. But I think it might be even more impactful and meaningful to students because they can sort of develop their own pathway. And your point about being interdisciplinary, it gives us an opportunity to eliminate some of the barriers that exist from students that might be in different disciplines across campus. For example, a minor being offered by the business school typically requires you to take a few business courses. I think our minor at St. Louis U's 18 credit hours. I believe that's what it was at the past university. Well, not all 18 are entrepreneurship classes. There's basic accounting and econ classes that students have to take to get that minor. We might be able to eliminate some of the barriers by having these digital badges or a potential certificate in the future.
And you mentioned the gaps. What is it that you mean by that?
Well, just like an entrepreneurial opportunity, right? Looking for segments that might not be being addressed at the moment, right? So from the business school perspective, we have really good curriculum in lots of different verticals, right? Finance, HR, accounting, including entrepreneurship. And then from a minor standpoint, we have that offered across campus, but take, for example, engineering programs. Most engineering programs don't allow a lot of flexibility in their classes, right? Almost all good engineering schools have, when a student lands as a freshman, they pretty much know what classes they're taking for the next 4 years, and there's not a lot of flexibility. Right. So to add on a minor of any sort, it can add on a year or more to a student's time at the university. And when we're talking about the cost of tuition and the opportunity cost of being at school for another year or more, are there ways that we can address those students that can't take that pathway? And the certificate program or a digital badge or micro-credentialing, we think is that way to be able to provide this education to students, eliminate some of the barriers, and put it in spots that are manageable for them, right? Without having to add that extra time.
I interviewed Alexander Osterwalder, and he developed the business model Canvas and several other tools for entrepreneurship. And he also advocates bringing in the many different entrepreneurship tools like design thinking and jobs and lean startup as you need them, right? But one of the things that I also spoke to him about was that, if you're a student and you're interested in entrepreneurship, there's a whole language of entrepreneurship that you need to become familiar with, let alone understanding how to use the different tools or how to deploy them. Before you say, well, gee, I've got this great concept for a commercial or even a social impact endeavor. Now what do I do? Do you see that a certificate or a badge can fill, that kind of a gap?
Yeah, absolutely. And I will be first to admit, I maybe didn't realize how much language was missing from a student that was coming from engineering, for example. When using the example of the business model canvas, I live it every day. So I'm just assuming most students are recognizing it. And then you realize they've never heard of it before. And it's just because of that lack of exposure, or they just haven't gotten to that stage in their academic career yet. So one of the things we did this semester was create a series of 4 workshops, really to create that exposure and generate this inspiration. This semester we focused on ideation, customer discovery, revenue modeling, and pitching. And students could come to the ones that were interesting to them, show up on a Friday, spend 2 hours with us, and let us really try to inspire students to develop this entrepreneurial mindset and see what they could add to their academic career while at St. Louis U. If you come to all 4, we gave them some credit by creating a badge that they can earn. But it was more about the value that we were creating for them and the impact we could have on them and the knowledge transfer versus the credit at this stage. In all honesty, students showed up for that, right? The badge, we didn't even advertise that to begin with. But when we did, they were very appreciative of the fact that then they could show it off, that these are some notches that they had towards that entrepreneurial development.
And as I speak with other universities, they use the certificate, or they actually have designed and developed the certificate in many, many different ways. Typically, what I'm seeing is, it's 4 to 5 courses. There's a couple of fundamental courses in entrepreneurship. There's a number of electives that are available across multiple disciplines as a way of bringing in those other disciplines. And then, there's, some kind of a practicum, or, here, use the tools type of thing. I mean, that's almost like a minor.
Yeah.
Because there is a curriculum there as opposed to, workshops and badges. What if you could comment on that approach, or is it that, so much of it depends on the university itself and the population of the students themselves?
I think it does depend, right? It does depend on the university. And, I was part of developing the certificate at NC State before I left there. And we had lots of discussions about, we didn't want to truncate the minor, right? We didn't want to pull students that would typically get the minor to do the certificate because they thought it was the easier path, right? And, that might be a negative connotation, but we want to make sure they get that rigor that was involved in the certificate and that it meant something, right? There should be different levels of that. And we took a different approach in terms of, it was a 12 credit hour certificate and plus an experiential piece of it, right? So, but what we did to make it not like the minor, where traditionally, if you get a minor from the business school, for example, all of those core classes are the same, prefix, right? They're all coming taught from the business school. We actually took a different approach and had students take 3 different courses with 3 different prefixes. So we wanted a business student to go take a course in design or engineering. We wanted design students to go take a course in English communications. That we had a list of courses they could choose from. And then we created these experiential opportunities, whether it be working in the clinic or living in the entrepreneurship village, that then stacked onto that. So it was rigorous and it was a lot of work for students. It was not quite as much as a minor, right? But it added that value. So that was the approach. And that's same idea I'm thinking about here at St. Louis U is like, how do we create something different? How do we create and fill that gap for students and eliminate the barriers, right? Like the prereqs that you might need to get a minor, is there a way that we can get students engaged without having them to do that, or they might as well just get the minor?
Are you seeing that, prospective students, high school students that are considering applying to St. Louis University, is there, do the badges, is that an attractive attraction for them for applying to St. Louis University? And sort of adjunctly, do you see that, parents are also interested in that as their son or daughter is pursuing, a studies in, more liberal arts majors?
Yeah, anecdotally, yes, right? Because we actually do a lot of high school programs here at St. Louis U for the city of St. Louis, and we talk about the badges and the opportunities in entrepreneurship, and that is of interest. I don't have data to show that that's the reason they choose versus not choose yet. We just don't have enough information yet. From a graduate standpoint, we do see specifically our international students looking towards that entrepreneur certificate as a differentiator, right? So getting an MBA at St. Louis U or any other higher academic institution is an MBA, right? And there's good ones, there's great ones, right? But if there's a differentiator like a certificate in entrepreneurship, we have seen a difference in that, and people, especially international students, join onto that. You bring up the parents though, as I actually think that might be another market that we might look at. It are alumni of our university or community members in our ecosystem being able to provide a certificate to them for different topics, right? So whether it be angel investing or fundraising, or is it the business model canvas digital badge for an alum that we might not have been talking about a business model canvas 15 years ago when they graduated, right? So I do think that opportunity exists, but it might not be the one that's driving a student at this point to choose us versus somebody else on the undergraduate level.
There are still a number of universities and colleges that do not have centers for entrepreneurship. Okay. And is there, and this is speculative, but especially for, liberal arts colleges and universities, could you see that offering that a certificate in entrepreneurship can be a foundation for launching a center for entrepreneurship? And where I'm going on that is if you're a president or a provost of a liberal arts university, then you want to bring in, all of the different students from all of the different disciplines to your, Center for Entrepreneurship, and offering a certificate in entrepreneurship, can be a way of attracting, if you will, customers to the center. Or is that something that is, am I getting a little bit farther over my skis on that?
No, I think you're absolutely right. Like, if you don't have a center already, it's a great MVP to build, right? It's a great way to do that customer discovery and see what you can deliver and what's of interest to students. And a certificate program is a lot easier to stand up than a center, right? So to be able to do that, gain some traction, put the right people in place to help, manage that certificate, and then make sure you're actually hitting the needs of the students. That's a great way to sort of prove, all right, now what do we build around that? Now, if you already have a center, that doesn't mean you got to go backwards, right? You can still focus on, all right, what's the gap in the market in our population on campus that we're not hitting, or even our alumni or ecosystem partners, who are we not addressing, and is their certificate the right approach to be able to meet those needs?
And it is what are the challenges and the pushback for developing a certificate in entrepreneurship, say, or even some of the badges that you have seen both at SLU and also at NC State?
Yeah, I not specifically at NC State or SLU. I've gotten, I haven't gotten a lot of pushback, but I've talked to a lot of other center directors that have this issue. Oftentimes it is the misconception that when we talk about entrepreneurship and anything, that it means we're talking about launching a new company or small business or family business, depending on where you are, and that doesn't fit. And for us, it's always been, launching a company or having a new venture or something spin out of it is going to happen. That's for sure. We are definitely creating entrepreneurs that are going to launch companies, but the majority of them are not. And it's more focused on developing that entrepreneurial mindset. And the entrepreneurial mindset makes the English major or the design student or the pre-med student or the engineering student a better student. And that's always been our message. It's not about small business. It's not about launching a new company. It's more about developing this mindset. And how do you go out and create value in the world, which might be launching a company, but if it's not, joining a company or joining a nonprofit, there's still there's a great value add to that student by going through that experience and thinking that way. I think the second pushback typically, and this is not unique to any university, is the silos that we create typically around funding. So who's gonna fund it, or who's gonna get the money from it, and who's going to get the recognition. Luckily, I've not experienced that at SLU nor at NC State, but I know that is who owns it is also sometimes a pushback.
We talked about the language associated with entrepreneurship that can be exclusive, but you also touched on something that I'm also seeing is that universities are looking to define what they consider to be entrepreneurship, so that it's very clear. For example, what you just said is that entrepreneurship is about creating value in whatever you're going to be doing. But also when I speak with directors of centers of entrepreneurship, many of them have not yet, or the university has not yet actually written down, defined, this is how we define entrepreneurship. Is that something that you could see is kind of beneficial? And have you already articulated that?
I hope so. I believe I've articulated it, especially being recruited here. I've sort of set the standard of what my expectations are, how we define entrepreneurship from a university standpoint. And the access to the students and what that means. Yeah, writing it down and making sure we articulate it is key, right? So there's not mixed messages. Are we talking about launching small companies and that's all we're focused on? Or are we focused on developing mindsets? Are we focus on, scalable tech startups or and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just like understanding what's your strengths and what are we going to lean into? Like what I've always thought about it from an approach of, from an undergraduate standpoint, it's about developing the student, not a concept. So having a student develop through that process of thinking like an entrepreneur, they could be working on a small business, they could be working on a simple product, and then be sitting beside a student that's working on a scalable high tech venture, and then the student beside them working on a potential nonprofit. That's okay with me. I want them to find something that they're passionate about when they're in this learning stage, because that'll make it worth it to them. Entrepreneurship's not easy by any means, but it's worth it. And by putting them in a situation where we're really focused on developing them and not focused on developing the startup, we're going to put them in a place where they find the right pathway of success. That has been, I believe I've articulated that pretty clearly at our university, and we have buy-in. I mean, that's why I'm here, because people across the university believe in that and are opening the door so all students have access to it.
How have the badges and the certificate, how has that changed the resources that you need for your center?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, there is management of the badges. I don't know that it's changed our resource needs, because that component was already here when I got here. So we were able to, take advantage of that and deploy it appropriately. In the future, I see it as increasing our resource needs because we have more put through as students, right? We increase the number of students that come through the center because they want to earn a digital badge or earn a certificate in entrepreneurship. But at this stage, a year into it, resources haven't changed a lot for us because we're still building the team. We're still building out what the new vision of the center looks like. But in the future, it will be people, it'll be marketing, it'll be, telling the story of the students and why they got those badges and those certificates.
Are you doing or planning to do longitudinal studies and tracking of the certificate and also the badges? And at this stage early on, are you seeing, are there any trends that you're seeing?
Yeah, I don't have any trends yet because we're really too early into it. But yeah, tracking the value is definitely something we're going to look at. Like back in my previous life, we were tracking the stories that students were telling when they were applying for jobs or raising funding. During the interview process, they talked about their clinical project, right? And that was the differentiator of that experiential learning that they did in school. That was not like anything else that we're doing in other classes. So I believe that the digital badge, because it lives on LinkedIn and it lives in a world where other people can see and dig into it and see what you actually had to do to earn this, that there is some value from that. And there'll be a better way for us to track that, because there's this digital footprint versus me having to ask students, like, how was your job interview? What kinds of questions did they ask you? How were you able to differentiate yourself? We'll do both, but there will be some digital footprint that we can actually follow as well.
An important part, two very important parts of, the lean methodology, and, just entrepreneurship are being able to present and tell your story. And then also being able to go out and interview stakeholders, interview partners, interview potential customers, the different markets that where you want to test your hypothesis. How do you leverage those students and that kind of talent for I don't know, developing badges, and, encouraging team development as well.
Yeah, totally, absolutely. I mean, we're gonna do more, but I can give you specific examples in the last year or the last semester that it kicked off, where we have a program here at St. Louis U called Med Launch, where it's a collaboration between the medical school, engineering, business school, and a few others, where students across the entire campus, undergrad and graduate, tackle problems that are submitted by clinicians, doctors, nurses from either our College of Medicine and Hospital or SSM Health, which is a partner here. And so they take these real world problems and they tackle that. We built digital badges around that engagement, right? So the team lead versus the team members, and those teams are all cross-disciplinary, right? So you might have a pre-med or even a second year med student working with an engineering student, working with a business student, and then working with someone studying Spanish, right? So we're providing that opportunity, this cross-discipline from that aspect, and leaning on their strengths, right? And, whether it be from the business student or the med student, how we're tackling those problems, we're leaning on their strengths. I think in the future, expanding more, like your examples of theater or psychology, we need to do a better job of showing those pathways for them. In my past life at NC State, we had a great arts entrepreneurship program. And that program, when combined with the business school and the engineering school, was fantastic, right? You had the theater majors, you had the artists that were going through the classes to earn an arts entrepreneurship degree or a minor, but also thinking about how do you take this idea that you're really passionate about, that traditionally is not going to be a high skill startup, and do something with it that can be impactful for you and also to your potential customers. So I'm a big believer that cross-discipline and creating opportunities around the certificate or the badge to bring those groups together and let them earn together in a way like the Med Launch program is doing.
If you were to speak with, let's say, a president or a provost of a university that does not yet have an entrepreneurship center, what kind of guidance would you give them in terms of, what it is going to take in terms of time and resources, and what would be the foundational programs that you would start with?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think the first piece is really finding a champion, someone that's, willing to make that effort in the beginning to not let it die, right? A lot of programs, a lot of universities and colleges, like entrepreneurship is sexy, right? Let's stamp it on something and let's claim it. And I get it, right? But that's not sustainable, right? You need somebody that's a champion that's going to go and be compassionate and empathetic to the students and where they are. That's first and foremost. I think from a programmatic standpoint, or what to stand up first, it really depends on what's there, right? I've lived these two different lives in the last, couple of years, where at NC State, it was big engineering, small business school, and small everything else, basically. Mm-hmm. Versus at St. Louis U, it's more, big medical school, big law school, big engineering school, big business school. We're sort of all on the same level playing field. And because of that, those needs are different from standing up, because the opportunity to be cross-disciplinary is tremendous, right? There's this pull and drive. So, in that type of situation, I would focus on what touches the most students across campus. So workshops, for example, or our e-mentor program that we put together that's open across campus, in person and on a digital platform, the badges, the potential certificate we're putting together, things that really do reach across the entire campus. So I think it's dependent on what the university looks like, what type of students you have, and then what's going to add the most value to them. That's the first thing I would do, and then build accordingly. But that champion has got to be there. And the more champions you get, the better off you're going to be. Like when I left NC State, we had champions in all colleges and all colleges on campus. We have champions here at St. Louis across the entire campus as well. And that's tremendously helpful, especially when you're talking to the provost and the president, when it's not just one person, you have a whole group of people that believe in this mission and believe the impact it can have on students.
Being entrepreneurial about entrepreneurship is you've got to, get out of the building and, talk to the different constituents. If an entrepreneurship center is going to have 30 or more different constituents, from your freshmen, high school applicants, all the way through to, young alumni, mid-career alumni, older alumni. And so much of it is an entrepreneurship center is going to depend on funding. And so, you certainly want to present data, hard data, to potential funders or potential sponsors of the entrepreneurship center. So how do you get all the data from 30 or more different constituents without, having some kind of analysis paralysis and being overwhelmed by, just the challenge of being able to, get feedback and input and understand the needs of all of these different categories of users?
So I try to think in buckets of three, right? So I know students are first and foremost, right? That if I keep that as our North Star, then we're never going to go wrong. So from that standpoint, and then you have to expand it. Like I've already started thinking this way. Students are not just the ones that are on campus right now. It's the ones coming and it's the ones that left. So thinking about it from that perspective. So from a funding standpoint, you need two things to happen. You need seed investment, right? And that's, you might be able to convince a donor at an early stage to make that investment, but that's rare, right? That's the friends and family round if we were out raising money. And if it's not a donor, it's got to be the dean or the president or the provost that's willing to put in enough in the pot to create this momentum and excitement for your alum and donors to then participate and support it. The way I look at the impact is like, who's showing up, how often are they showing up, and who are they telling? So from a student standpoint, who and how many are showing up? If we put on a workshop and only one student shows up, well, that doesn't mean it wasn't impactful. It might have changed that student's life, but is that replicable? Is that sustainable? How do we get 2 to the next one? How do we get 20 to the next one? And what's the right number? And then measuring like, all right, who's coming back? One of the greatest programs we run, and I love this program as our e-mentor program, where we get, we're averaging 40 people, students and mentors that show up at the events. We do 3 a semester, and they continue to show up. And what I don't have the data here at St. Louis, but I've got 6 years of data before I came here. What was the cool thing was they continue to show up even after they graduated. So you got to see that flip from student to mentor. And they also were a mentee, but to other mentors in their room. And you created this really cool social interaction and relationship in that environment. Now, measuring that in terms of metrics and saying, 40 people show up, 3 times a semester, that's one thing. But the real metric, the real value is those connections that are happening and who's showing up, how many are showing up, and how often are they showing up. That's really what we try to look at, that repetitive piece. Then it's just like entrepreneurship, right? Mm-hmm. I've got to be able to articulate that to the right stakeholder, whether that's the donor, the dean, the president, or to future students and their parents. So that's the approach I've always taken, and so far it's worked out pretty good.
How do you assess, the needs in terms of, entrepreneurship for a student who has no experience in entrepreneurship? I mean, has has never thought of entrepreneurship. I mean, they're a potential customer, but you know, you don't want to go in and say, gee, if we offered this, would you be interested? Of course, they're going to say yes. How do you gather information from that group of students?
Yeah. So two things there, like Bill all at MIT always says, like, everybody's born an entrepreneur, right? So not having exposure to entrepreneurship is, you'd have to be living in a cave by now, right? Everybody's born an entrepreneur. It's just a matter of what do you do with that, right? That doesn't mean everybody's going to be comfortable. That's where the difference is. Not everybody's not comfortable going out and launching a new company, but developing a mindset of thinking like an entrepreneur is absolutely obtainable and impactful, right? So if I get a student that might not necessarily connect the dots of what entrepreneurship is, I think that's typically the case. It's not that they don't know what entrepreneurship is. They just might not know how we're defining it and what it means to them. Because if they buy products, if they have a cell phone, right, they're exposed to what entrepreneurship is. It's just about connecting those dots for them, and then being the inspiration for them to use that way of thinking to create value in their own lives. I have very entrepreneurially minded students that graduated and joined companies and made impact to those companies, and they didn't go launch a company, but they're very entrepreneurial. I have one student that graduated and went into the Marines. That's not a very entrepreneurial organization, but the way he was able to think, he was able to articulate his ideas to his commanders where other people couldn't. And he talks about being able to think like an entrepreneur and how that impacted him in an organization as strict and as regiment as the Marines would be, that it was a way for him to differentiate. And he's been very successful in that career path. So it's more about role modeling, giving students connections, building that inspiration, and showing them what entrepreneurial mindset, entrepreneurial thinking and entrepreneurship can really do for them, in that pathway of success for them.
This was fantastic, Lewis. I can't thank you enough on this. And this really took it to, took our initial interview and actually expanded upon that. I appreciate that very much.
Thanks for including me. I always have fun talking with you, and it's anytime I can talk about entrepreneurship, I'll do it. So thanks.